cable channel 1303 or on the internet by accessing bucksportmaine.gov and selecting Agendas and Minutes and choosing this workshop and clicking on the video button next to the workshop. Questions or comments may be submitted in this workshop by emailing rich.rotella@bucksportmaine.gov.
Great. Thank you, Rich. Good evening, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I do a lot of public speaking, but I talk pretty quietly. So welcome. My name is Travis Pryor. I work with GEI Consultants, and we're leading the design and development of this master plan tonight. We're focused on downtown Bucksport's coastal resiliency master plan, generally the waterfront area that follows the walkway. We're going to give a brief presentation about background and go over the agenda, and then the primary focus of tonight is the public workshop, where we'll break out into smaller tables and get to hear from you all and your interest in the waterfront. There's an agenda that we passed out. We're going to give some brief introductions here, followed by some project overview and background information. John is going to talk a little bit about some of the coastal inundation water level risk that we're considering. We're going to talk a little bit about public input received to date. We have an online survey. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the breakout sessions, and we'll separate out maybe into 3 different tables to keep the conversations going and get your input. Then we'll report back to the overall group and talk about next steps in the process. So again, from GEI Consultants, we have a coastal practice group focus primarily on projects like this through permitting and design and construction oversight all throughout coastal Maine. And my name is Travis Pryor. I'm the project manager for this effort.
My name is John Garreau. I'm a waterfront engineer with GEI Consultants. Work mostly in consulting for seawalls, docks, marinas, all waterfront infrastructure. And happy to be here and present to you all and answer any questions.
I'm Rich Rotella, the Community and Economic Development Director. This is all made possible through a SHIP grant that the town received through the Department of Marine Resources. Also on the Waterfront Committee, and with Luke out, I guess I'm the acting chair tonight.
Mike Ormsby, I'm the harbor master and manage the marina.
Jay Lanfer, I'm the Public Works Director.
I'm Mark Eastman, I'm a town councilor.
Welcome. Thanks for coming. We do have a sign-in sheet if you folks, and some agendas. Guys don't mind filling that out. All right, thank you guys. We're going to go over just a quick glossary of some common terms that we talk about. Some of you may be very familiar with this, and some less so. So FEMA is the first one. We've kind of organized these by groups. They're one of the regulatory agencies at the federal level that's often involved with waterfront projects, whether it's in terms of funding for supporting studies or implementation, and they're the primary federal agency responsible for helping people during and after disasters. FEMA defines a variety of what they call special hazard flood areas, and they have a variety of rating systems. Most of what you have out here on your coastline is what's called a VE zone, or velocity zone with a known elevation, or an approximate A zone, which is outside of that velocity area with a known elevation. And these are helped to define and be the basis for the National Flood Insurance Rate Program, which is regulated, and areas in these flood hazards are required to purchase flood insurance and comply with them. FEMA defines a base flood elevation typically as something that's a storm event, or a high tide event like you guys had this past winter. That was really close to that 1% chance of flood. Folks call that a 100-year storm, but there's, 100-year or 500-year storm event does not necessarily mean that you're going to only have it happen once every 100 years or every 500 years. We've had coastal storms over the past couple winters that have been really close to or exceeded that 1% storm. Or if you remember Hurricane Sandy and Irene and some of those that hit New York, those were 500-year storm events that happened in back-to-back years. So still not a high chance that those will happen every year, but it doesn't mean you're only going to get one once every 100 years. We look at some basic water levels. For this study, we're focused on the mean high water level, which is, there's a national tidal datum epic that NOAA and the National Ocean Service looks at over about a 19-year period. It is the average of the two highest tides of any given day, and we look at that in terms of when things out here will potentially become nuisance flooding for you on a daily basis. Mean low water is the extent of what the town kind of controls and operates before it becomes state waters, and that is in that 19-year epoch, what the lowest of the lower waters are on any given day. And then relative sea level rise is a little bit more of a definition than just sea level rise. It's based on sea level rise happens at varying rates throughout the world at different levels, and it's relative to land-based data in your particular area, or Maine's coastline for the most part for all of us. Maine Climate Council, if you've heard about them, they've been around for about 4 years. They developed a Maine Can't Wait or Won't Wait, a 4-year climate action plan sponsored by the Governor's Office of Innovation Policy in the Future. And they've been updated, or they're starting to update that because it's now 4 years old. And there's some state mandates around that in order to develop a plan that helps the state meet some greenhouse gas emissions and set regulatory targets for other climate resiliency effects. The Maine Climate Council, for the purposes of our coastal study, has what they call a commit to manage relative sea level rise estimate. And then they have what they would like you to do is also be prepared to manage kind of a worst case scenario relative sea level rise. And then they typically recommend looking at that and planning horizons about 2050 or approximately 25 years from now, which is kind of length of time that a lot of public works investment projects would typically last. And then by 2100, which is hard for a lot of us to get our heads around. A lot of folks probably may not be here, and I think John is one of the younger folks in the room, will be closer to 100 at that point. But if you are making some investments, again, like the bridge across the way or some other more substantial investments, maybe in a seawall as a result of this project, you would want or hope it would last 75 to 100 years. So we do ask folks to consider looking that far out. I'm going to talk a little bit about project background. Again, we did a shorefront assessment study in 2022 and talk about some project goals. This is the project area we are talking about, from Main Street down to the Penobscot River and from Steamboat Lane over to the Irving Circle K gas station. I guess I've had a long history of active waterfront uses and development. There are a lot of remnant piers and wharf structures where you can see kind of some of the timbers sticking out in some of these points, to a variety of commercial and economic and residential and recreational activities along the waterfront. The waterfront's recognized as one of the town's most valuable assets that you guys would like to protect. Again, it serves a variety of purposes for the town and for visitors. The downtown waterfront, as you've seen increasingly, I think recently, is experiencing a variety of levels of increased erosion due to some of the coastal storms as well as upland kind of rainfall precipitation, runoff events. And then there's some environmental risks that we're going to talk about in terms of potential increase from sea level rise or storm surge, storm intensity and frequency increases. And we did, initially look at just the shorefront stabilization, the walkway, but there are a variety of other infrastructure improvements that are facilities that are potentially at risk, the utilities with the sewer down there, for instance, or your pier, marina, and some of the upland buildings that are right at the bottom of the slope. In 2022, we initially came out in response to some increased erosion issues, which have continued since then, largely along the edge of the walkway in the lower areas throughout the project. And then the Circle K experienced some erosion, and some of that has been fixed since then and remediated, but there's the potential for threats like that from upland flows as well, too, going forward. We came up with some recommendations for addressing some of these immediate needs. And then while we're at it, we also talked with the town about if you are going to do a reconstruction of your walkway or protecting your pier or some of this other stuff, you might want to look at kind of overall comprehensive vision for the waterfront and just check if what's been identified in the past is still relevant today, or what you guys might envision for new improvements in the future. This kind of touches some on our goals. So again, why we're here tonight is to develop that, or start developing that overall coastal resiliency master plan for your downtown along the waterfront. Consider the community's long-term interests and needs. We're also going to consider near-term improvements for what you could do to adaptation, in the near future here, and then again, we're looking out at 2100, what you could consider for long-term improvements. And the project, as Rich mentioned, is supported through some NOAA federal funding, which is administered through the Maine Coastal Program, Department of Marine Resources. As part of that, they ask you to consider the Maine Climate Council's recommendations for relative sea level rise. And with that, I'm going to let John do a little bit of talking here about some of the inundation levels that we looked at.
Thank you, Travis. So
Seats, or you want us-
I think I'm
There.
good here. Yeah, I'll kind of peek at the laptop. So we developed some plans of the whole downtown area, broke them out into 4 different smaller scaled maps. We wanted to show what the mean high water looked like on the plan and where that meets the shoreline. Also the base flood elevation, which is associated with the 100-year storm, which should be very recent in everyone's memory from the storms this winter, with having multiple of those storms occurring. So yeah, this is the FEMA flood map showing the base flood elevations. So we are in a velocity zone, meaning you can get wave action above 3 feet here, although that is kind of limited by the shoreline with the riprap. So where Travis's cursor is with the AE zone, we don't expect a lot of wave action, but the same level of flooding. Down by the Irving and the Circle K, it is a lower base flood elevation, but for this project, we've kept it consistent, as most of the walkway is under this elevation 12. So the figure here on the right shows the projections from the Maine Climate Council's reports, and this shows our intermediate scenario in the green line, which is the commit to manage. That's 1.5 feet by 2050, and then 3.9 feet by 2100. That's what the state recommends to commit to. At a higher level, we want to prepare to have to adapt to 3 feet at 2050 and 8.8 feet out to 2100, which is the higher scenario that is lower probability but higher risk, and that green line, higher probability that that's going to occur but lower risk to the assets. So this is one of the inset maps. This shows, you can see the town dock down towards the left, and then the town marina. The different shadings you can see on the section at the bottom too. In the blue, that's your mean high water. The darker blue is in its existing condition now with where high water sits, and then the lighter blue shows that 1.5 feet out to 2050. So in this case, we wanted to look at mean high water to see what the flooding is going to look like in a daily occurrence. A lot of this site comes up fairly quickly, so we don't expect to see a lot of impacts with daily occurrence, flood occurrence in this scenario. But in the green, you can see the base flood elevation, which is, I think, reflects pretty accurately what happened this winter with the storms, where a lot of those parking lots are underwater, and that's without sea level rise. So we add the 1.5 feet, and you can see how much further that goes in with the lighter green shade. So projecting that out another 50 years, still under the commit to manage.
You can move it louder,
Sure, yeah.
or if you want to a microphone.
Yep.
Can you hear that?
Yep.
Thank you.
Sorry. So yeah, projecting out to the 2100, you can see in the same graph that this is reaching a lot more inland on the base flood elevation. So important to note here that the daily high water is still not reaching above the embankment. It's not impacting the walkway here, but you would be getting those storm events that reach further inland, have more impacts on the buildings there, and the parking lots. So like for the pier and the area around the marina, it's not underwater during a daily occurrence, but you wouldn't be able to access them during these 100-year storm scenarios. And so that was the commit to manage, the intermediate scenarios. For the prepare to manage, and this is the higher end of the projections, you can see that out to 2050 with the 3-foot rise in sea level, it's pretty similar to what the 2100 is for the commit to manage. But during base flood events, now you're getting impacts to these buildings going up towards Main Street, a lot more flooding, inundation, and then projecting that out to 8.8 feet at 2100. Now your daily high tide is pretty much under, most of this waterfront area is underwater, and obviously some of these buildings are completely inundated, even during daily high tides. So this scenario, again, it's lower probability but carries a lot higher risk with what to plan for. Pass it back to Travis.
And we'll have some more time and hope good public debate here going forward. If there are pieces that you'd like to interrupt or not interrupt, but ask questions about along the way, feel free to do so. We'll also follow back on this after our breakout sessions and have some opportunity to do some general question and answer. Thank you, John. The next part I'm going to talk about a little bit is we have an online public survey, and we also have hard copies available at the town office. If you'd like a hard copy tonight, you can obtain one from Rich. We also encourage folks, we're going to be doing this through the end of August, maybe a little bit into September, to have that public survey continue. So far, you have about 56 public surveys responses, which we're doing this in Algonquin and a few other areas, and you guys are setting the benchmark so far for projects for us this year. So the public input has been great so far. Primary interest for most folks has not been a surprise. It is associated with the walkway, or you can see a lot of similar words and terms associated with walkway. And when we ask it in terms of specific, important additions or improvements that you'd like to see to existing infrastructure, the walkway is right at the top again of most folks' priority list. We ask people about, have you experienced coastal flooding and stormwater runoff events in the downtown? It's about 50-50. We do have more details on the survey about whether these are residents or business owners, stuff like that. We'll look at that a bit further in terms of who's experiencing it and why. In terms of is coastal flooding in the downtown of concern to you, again, in terms of how it might impact some of your interests? Not surprising. Most of the concern is around maintaining that walkway. Do you support potential local, state, or regional efforts to make some of these improvements, or maybe funding support to adapt and protect the downtown waterfront area? Most of the folks are supporting it so far, taking the survey. A few folks are unsure. We suspect that's because we haven't proposed any concepts for what that might look like yet. And then, one person has said no so far. And then again, we ask about what are the 3 most important areas that you'd like prioritized for protection. It comes back to walkways again. All right, so that's a summary of public input to date. Again, we would encourage you to take the survey if you haven't, and thanks to those of you who have. And also it can be passed along. It's on the town's, and town's been emailing it, I believe, on a local Facebook page. There are a variety of ways you can take that, or you can show up at the town office in the future and get some hard copies. For the next about 30 minutes or so, or 45 minutes, we're going to break up into small groups. Yes, sir.
Question before you do.
Yes.
Could you go and bring the chart back up that shows the increase of water? I think it was 1.5 feet by 2050.
Sure.
If I'm correct, and I'm trying to understand.
That is the first commit to manage level, yes.
All right, so you have 1.5 feet by 2050. What has the last 25 years been? The past 25. What's it raised?
I don't know exactly what the past 25
You're the consultant, come on.
is. Well, so NOAA, yeah. Thank you for asking. NOAA's historic is about 6 or 7 inches over the last 100 years per decade. I believe that sped up to about 8 inches or so.
I just want to make sure in my mind that I understand what you're saying. So you go up 1.5 feet by 2050, but you want it for 100 years, or 75 anyway.
That's
To make
what we're recommending. If you're going to make millions of dollars in improvements down there, that you consider something that lasts that long.
So putting that in there your chart correctly, we're going up another, at least another 6 inches to another foot in water in that time period, maybe even more if I go to the high risk of 8 feet. So the whole point is trying to protect the walkway, as we saw here. So really what you're really saying is to raise the walkway, the marina area as well, would have to come up, I'm gonna guess, 5 feet?
In one scenario, or yeah, possible improvement.
I mean, if you're gonna protect it for that long period of time. So I'm just trying to look at the land and
Sure.
trying to make sure I understand what you're advising us before we break out into a group.
Yeah.
That,
Yep.
that's the only thing that was on my mind is the increase in the kind of effort that would go into bringing that up. We all know it washed out under the bridge, which was not nice. Okay, we've seen it washed out over, I can't remember the name of the property over here, but you brought it up and showed it.
Yeah, 26 Main Street has the
We
point
saw it
down
on the
here.
lawn,
Yeah.
all right? So we know it's all gotta come up,
Yeah.
but that would also mean the person's property's got to come up as well.
Potentially, yeah. There's a lot of public-private
So what
partnership
would
that's going to have to happen.
if that person also has to raise their property, is, the powers to be that grant that power gonna allow that increase in earth be brought down?
There's going to be a variety of factors involved in that. The regulatory agencies will have a say. The funding agencies that will support a project like this, which is why we mentioned the Maine Climate Council. We think that's going to be it's a recommendation now, but it's likely going to be tied to at least state funding and maybe federal funding going forward if you want to make
Well, I
improvements.
think down at the marina, Mike, help me out, weren't the floats like underwater?
Some of them floated back into the river
Yeah.
this past winter.
Well,
yeah.
they were taken out during those 2 storms we had last winter.
Right.
And they were sitting on the tarred section up there, and which does flood. But I never thought it would get enough water to float 2 of them stacked on each other, because that's a lot of weight. But it did, and we had 2 sets float off into the cove. So it did get high. I just got to say, I've been harbor master 39 years in Bucksport, and I've watched the waterfront for all that time. I can't honestly say that I've seen a water rise of a regular water height. It's pretty much, to me, the same as it was. Back in 1991, we had a hurricane that came, but there was no marina, there was no walkway, and the height of that hurricane, the tide came up to the same level in the parking lot of the town dock. And so I'm just guessing at my point that it was about the same level of water in 1991 as we had one of those 2 storms just this last winter. And but now we have the walkway, and we had an east wind that caused the wave action coming down the river to wash out that, because it was high enough to hit the walkway, and it washed out the sand out of the bricks and caused them to come apart. So the marina didn't sustain any damage other than the pump out for the sewer for the boats that went underwater, and we're still using it, but it's wired, so I got to turn it on with a circuit breaker to make it go on and off. We've replaced every part in it, and it still doesn't work right. But our wells for the gas and diesel tanks flooded with salt water, so I had to pump them out afterwards. And other than that, the building is on stilts, and it only came up to the first step. It wasn't even close to getting in the building, so it really did no damage other than me having to pump out the 2 wells and the sewer pump being broken. So if I'm wrong, let me know. But we originally, when we built that walkway, we wanted it a little higher down at that area. And one of the departments, DOT or DEP, reduced it for a couple feet. So it actually would have been higher, and it might have been safe. But
Just for a question.
Yep.
Since it seems to be going on and on, before we're never gonna get to the.
Sure.
My question was, when you're distinguishing between sea level rise and storm-induced level rise, because it's 2 different things, because this is a particular and peculiar area, since you have the river coming down, you got 2 more entryways, you the storm, if it's high tide and it's blowing the water in and the river coming down, it's going to flow up here. But that's one type of sea level rise, as opposed to a permanent sea level. That's two different functions, and you haven't really distinguished that to me in anything that you're saying here.
Sure. Yeah. And we think there's three or four kind of ways of looking at risk. So there's the precipitation and increased intensity of rainfall, which you've experienced with some of the recent storms, and a lot of inland Maine did, that flowed down through the rivers in the December storm this past winter, from Bethel and some of the mountain areas inland, and impacted some of the coastal areas. So there's been documented increases in frequency of those storm events and intensity. There have been more astronomical high tides set, as monitored at the Portland gauge and at the Bar Harbor tidal data or epic gauges over the past 10 to 20 years than there have been on historic records. There's also the impacts from that static water level increase, which is primarily what you experienced this past year, and we've seen as evidence. You have riprap and you have some fairly small rocks on your shorefront, and a lot of those haven't gotten moved around by what we would expect from storm surge and wave runoff.
For the storm and
Right.
the
You're fairly protected.
And that was coming, so
Yeah.
you answered my question. There's two different types of sea level rise.
There are.
One we can sort of prepare for, the other one, which would be for storms, is subjective to the storm itself.
It is.
Which is hard to prepare for, since you don't know the level of the storm now or 2 years from now that you're going to get. All right, that's
There
that's
is,
one thing
and
I'm looking
no,
at.
it's a good question, and so that's part of why we mentioned the FEMA velocity zones. So those do take into account about a 3-foot storm surge into their recommended elevation of 12 feet. They also have some static or approximate A zones in the area that are also saying that flood elevation is about 12 feet, and that's pretty consistent with what we've heard from Mike and others in terms of what they've experienced here, that you're fairly sheltered. You have to have just the right shot of wind coming up the Narrows or to really create storm surge. But we do feel that whether it's FEMA modeling from historic storms like 91 or a lot of the storm records are from the 70s, that's what they're allowed to look at for historic data. There is new scientific modeling and a lot of computer-generated information which is doing these predictions for relative sea level rise in the future, and at rates that are not consistent with what we've seen. Whether you can actually see an inch or two or a few inches over the past
know I
decades are
can't.
hard for you and I to discern.
It all looks the same after
yeah.
a few years, right?
Yeah. What they do know, they've been monitoring air temperature around the globe, and we've had our warmest years on record and wettest and more hurricanes and things like that increasing over the past so many decades and years more recently. And they feel like with a lot of the computer modeling and scientific background behind it that they can project that things are going to accelerate. But there's still there's an intermediate low, intermediate, high, and then high risk levels. So there's still some level of uncertainty in terms of what they think sea level rise and storm surge is going to look like in the future. So some of the things like the state is looking at is what's reasonable. Maybe 1.5 feet of sea level rise in the next 25 years is hopefully conservative enough. They don't want you to be doing millions of dollars in upgrades and have it be a few inches too short. So and from a professional standpoint, we stand behind making sure that, if you're going to make investments, that they're sustainable for the long term. Some of the things we're doing, like in Machias right now, which is a little bit of a step ahead of you guys, they've done the planning study, is looking at a berm and potentially, a sheet pile driven wall within that berm. But it's got a concrete cap, and you've invested in the infrastructure to put that wall in place. And then if the sea level rise projections and computer modeling plays out that the worst case scenario is more likely to happen in the future, you could add a few feet of increase on that. And real quickly back to which level do we plan for? We are going to present. We want to hear what your value and concerns are today. We've been developing a lot of strategies or seen what's been happening in New York City and others for areas where they're starting to implement some of these measures. And we will be offering some of those solutions to you guys to help prioritize and select which ones you think are most appropriate. But we want to hear what's of value to you here most tonight. There are things you may choose, like you may leave the walkway where it is right now and maybe turn it into pavement versus pavers. That's a little bit more sustainable in terms of allowing a little bit of washover, which you had 100-year storm events, and for the most part, your shorefront held up pretty well in this past winter to those. You didn't have a lot of that wave run up. So in the short term, you may choose something like paving the walkway and just knowing that during a storm event like that, you don't want people down there, and that may happen once a year or once every few years or once every 100 years. You may also then elect to do something more substantial like elevating that walkway in the future, and you'd have to coordinate with upland abutters. Either that walkway is going to protect them potentially where it is and they won't have to raise the grade of their houses, but you also have rainfall continuing to come down the hill and you're creating a bathtub. So you need to have some kind of stormwater pumps to pump that out. So we didn't want to come up with a plan tonight and tell you this is the way it is and where it should be. We wanted to hear from you about what you value, to help us to narrow down kind of our range of options we'll present to you at our next meeting. Any other questions? All right, well, at that I said we're going to break out into 3 tables, probably about 5 people or so, or 6 per table. I'd encourage you to sit with folks maybe that you don't know, or to have new conversations.
I'm over here in the women's group.
Excellent. We'll have representatives of the committee and John and myself at each table to record notes. We encourage you to draw on. We have copies of the overview map to draw your ideas on there as well, and then we'll all report back to each other. And again, the online folks won't be able to hear these discussions, but they will be able to submit comments to Rich by his email, and we can take a look at those. Then we'll talk about next steps, and we can do a little bit more Q&A like we just did. So thank you. We'll break out. We'll probably put one map maybe up here and one on that table, and then we'll have some folks collect around this table.
Sounds good. Yep. We're going to go to a pause for the folks online right now. So everyone else, if you want to break out to your groups, I'll bring some paper and pen and stuff for you. If you guys just want to join in. From our breakout session, when the groups come and speak, because the next section is the breakout session reporting, if one person from each group would please come up to the podium and share what your group discussed so the folks at home could hear, because our session that we just had was muted for the public, so this would be their opportunity to hear what each group was discussing. So who would like to go?
Group like to start?
Yes, please.
Okay, we don't have a group name or anything. We didn't come up with that, but.
But we made you leader.
Yeah. They
Number
had me
one.
write a lot of stuff down, so, basically just tried to, one of the biggest concerns that came up right away was Hoffman's Point. And there was some discussion about how it might be possible to make that loop less out, like a more straighter shot so that it's easier. Because one of the big things that we were hoping could happen is that it can be wider, the pathway can be wider, which would make it easier to maintain and better for walking. And then hoping that with a new material, there's apparently a variety of materials, but something that is easy to maintain. And that would also hopefully allow to extend the season. And then it needs to be able to be accessed for repairs and for winter. Keeping in mind that if it's used in the winter, there's probably a need for some more labor costs that would be for upkeep. The rocks under the bridge erode, but the bridge height can't be changed. So there was discussion there about just protecting what's there, since we can't do a whole lot with that particular area. And we're talking a bit about some other funds, so thinking about how this project connects to other available funds, like the Senator Collins, I don't know what the name of that is, but.
CDS, Congressional Directed Spending.
Okay, and then there's funds on Main Street also. At the same time, there's the Holterchem Trust, and so thinking about, I personally don't know the intersection of all of those and how that could work. And with the marina itself, making sure that the building is okay at this point, but making sure it can be sustainable through a storm, and that and the potential for larger storms, making sure that it's made so that the walkway and area can flood without too much damage. Did I get everything?
Oh, you did great.
Okay.
Perfect.
Does anybody want all of this?
If you'd like to share, I'd be happy
There you
to.
go.
Maybe
I
I.
might add just one thing.
Yeah.
The edge of the walkway, up by the ends of, where the former mill was, by where the, if that could be like tied into Main Street potentially, because you get to that end, right, and I just feel like you can't really get up to Main Street, but I don't know if that's, if we could do that, I just think it would make a nice loop up. And have that just be a little bit more finished off than what it is. You walk and it just looks super industrial. It doesn't have to be like super fancy, but if it led someplace,
Like the other end that went up to Main Street.
yeah.
So what you're referring to is Steamboat Wharf, which is the road just after House of
Right.
Pizza and Riverview Eye Care. The Main Street Plan, or the VPI, the Village Partnership Initiative, the plan is for the walkway or sidewalk to continue, or to get you from that section of Main Street down to the walkway, including in a crosswalk to get you across the street over to where Brown Toe, Milliken, and Tozier's is. So that is one of the proposed ideas as part of the Village Partnership Initiative, and this is how that kicks in, Jen, with what you were speaking about. How do the other projects kick into what we're talking about tonight? So that is one of the plans and one of the ideas, and that's a really big one.
Yeah, it's not, especially people that come in and make the left at the bridge and they're here, they walk around and route them up to Main Street too, you know what I mean? If we could kind of tie that in, that would be nice.
Sorry, that was in the notes, but
Okay.
I left that one out of it.
Yes.
Well, we have heard a lot of that feedback, fortunately, in the survey as well, too. Just the connections to Main Street in general could be improved throughout most of the project area.
I know there is that one, there's like a whole series of like 45 steps up there. like in through the riprap, there is like the one staircase. Right, I don't think anybody uses that, or it's, you know what I mean?
So he's referring to,
Better way to get up to Main Street.
yeah, he's referring to just after the gazebo where the
Yeah,
yellow
I know
apartment
what-
building is, there's the set of stairs that goes to
Yeah,
the
there's a
public parking
walkway,
lot.
a paver walkway to that.
That's correct, yeah. So that is the
The
location.
town access point.
Yeah. And just for the folks at home, the 3 questions that were part of the public input breakout session. Question 1 was what you value about the current waterfront. Question 2, what your concerns, interests are in making coastal resiliency improvements, i.e. armoring the shorefront and or elevating structures like the walkway. And question 3, what improvements to existing facilities or new facilities you would like to see at the waterfront. How's about group number 2?
Yeah, so I think John and I can cover the other groups, maybe from the mics where we're sitting. Would you like to go next?
Sure. So, yeah, thank you to our group. I think we had a productive discussion. Definitely the biggest thing of value is the walkway. Seems to be the consensus. So protecting that and making sure that any of these improvements that's incorporated in the overall master plan. Boating access to downtown was also mentioned. So boaters from neighboring cities or towns coming into Bucksport and supporting the local economy is something of value here that we would like to, or my group would like to see continued. There's generally positive feedback or positive feelings towards the cruise ships in bringing business here to Bucksport. And I think that's pretty much it. Did I miss anything? Also the seating, I see. So the amount of seating and just the overall experience of being on the waterfront and the walkway, the open space, yeah. And leading to our question 2, there wasn't many concerns, but one of them was the exposed fuel tanks, which could be a problem between May 15th and October 15th when the season's open, and if those get flooded. So I think resiliency improvements would want to consider that, and concerns about if a seawall was installed, safety issues for that, so requiring guardrails, and yeah. Feel free to chime in too if I'm missing anything, but there wasn't many concerns from our group. And improvements to existing facilities, shoreland access and educational opportunities, so the ability to get down to the water and to educate the public on, that could be whatever we want to educate the public on, or whatever you want to educate the public on, marine resources or history. I think there is some history out there that I was reading today. And then filling in the railroad tracks to support a community garden space, splash pad, and more green space. So those are, I think, the highlights, if anyone wants to add on that. But yeah.
Great.
Pass it to Travis.
All right, thank you. For our group, first and foremost, they echoed a lot of what the public has said so far about supporting views and the walkway. We talked about a variety of ways to do that. In general, to try and address or prevent and mitigate against flooding in general, both upland and from the shore. And what that focused on was adaptive or armored solutions, whether it's elevating the walkway or making the material more resilient to flooding, but really maintaining that lower area and access to it versus the idea of kind of managed retreat and to more of the upland area. We talked about making a lot of the area maybe more ADA compliant and accessible where we could. There was a lot of talk, like we've heard from the other groups, about improving the west end, if you will, in terms of where the railroad tracks are, but the connection to Main Street. I talked to them a little bit. We'll have to decide about how an elevated berm or any kind of resiliency measures tie into the adjacent upland grade there at Steamboat Lane, and whether that's just before the last couple buildings or House of Pizza or continues past Steamboat Lane. So they're variety of opportunities there to make some improvements. A lot of them largely involve around working with CSX or requiring property from them to address those railroad tracks and provide an opportunity for additional park space. We talked a lot about it's not necessarily as great a parking or pedestrian access at that end as there is up at the Veterans Memorial Park. So I thought there were a lot of opportunities for improvements down there, and it was important to make them aesthetically pleasing and not just do a large paved parking lot, but to add some landscaping and additional site amenities and benches and lighting and seating and some of the other things that you all have talked about as well. There was some concern about the Historical Society building in particular being at risk and whether that will be elevated or relocated further upland. I also heard there's a new historical building maybe going in down at the former mill site or entrance. So it may support maybe relocating the other one upland a little bit. Let's see. Oh, we also talked a little bit about, it was recognized that maybe storm surge and wave run up aren't as eminent of an immediate threat, but what are some of the options that you could choose to deal with that? So we did talk about wave screens, which John's been up to Nova Scotia recently. They do a lot of that there, where you put piles and kind of a wall out in the river. Or a lot of communities are starting to do attenuating floats, like larger concrete floats if you have more of these berthing slips or docks for ferries or for ferry service or passenger cruise ships. Those could be on larger docks that also, with the weight and mass of the concrete, provide a shelter, inner harbor, if you will, that would help with wave attenuation. And I think that covers our group's conversations. We'll talk a little bit about next steps, and then we'll have some additional Q&A if we haven't answered all your questions tonight. So we're going to continue to gather public feedback. We appreciate everyone's thoughts tonight, as well as the surveys that have been introduced so far. It doesn't end this evening, so we'd like to continue to gather initial public input based on the survey, or if you want to share some thoughts with your neighbors and friends as you go home and talk about this meeting, hopefully after tonight, please do so and encourage them to take the survey. We're going to leave that open at least through the end of August and maybe a little bit into September. We also recognize that not everyone can make public meetings, and we may be reaching out to some targeted, what we call stakeholder or focus groups, if we haven't heard from them already. So we've talked with the wastewater treatment plant folks a little bit, but in the past, but we may follow up with them or some other business owners in the area or other interest groups. So if there are particular folks that you feel might not be represented and you want to reach out to Rich and let him know folks that we should target for discussion, we can reach out to them individually. After that public input has been collected, our plan is to develop a draft master plan and work with the Waterfront Committee initially on review of that in the fall. And then we'll be coming back to the public for a presentation. So that will have more concepts that address the values that we've heard from the community, and hopefully give you a list of things that's at least 75% there, maybe 90% at that point. Maybe there are a few things that you want to add for comment at that. We'll take that input in the late fall and work on that to develop the final master plan, and we'll be presenting that probably late fall, early winter, if you will, or late November, December. The Maine Coastal Program, who oversees the grant, has a goal, and it's usually an expectation to complete the project by the end of December. So we think we're still on target to do that. So I talked a little bit about the master plan. I heard some questions about funding. So a lot of the master plan will be formatted around our existing conditions assessment, what we heard from the public, and based on those findings, what we would recommend for options for you guys to consider and prioritize going forward. They may be prioritized based on cost of construction or when they could be implemented time-wise in the near term versus long-term improvements, or coordinated with another project like your Main Street improvements. And so you'll have a full range of options to choose from in terms of how you want to move forward with a path that best meets your needs. We're also very familiar with the different local, state, federal funding mechanisms that are in place to implement some of these projects. So we'll be providing an action plan that recommends some of those resources for you to look at and talk about going forward. I know Rich said he's managing about 10 grants right now, so maybe he has room for a couple more.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
So those we're familiar with, and it does take time. So a lot of times it's in phasing. You may choose to address just the lower lying areas first, and some of the more upland areas, or pier upgrades you're currently looking at. But other marina upgrades, something like that, might be in a 10-year horizon. You guys can decide some of those timelines and whether they're all tackled at once, or you have a tolerance for that much construction, or whether you want to do some things in smaller steps and phases. So our report will give you that level of information, and then we look forward to continue to coordinate with you guys and check in to see how you're moving forward beyond this year. So with that said, thank you all for coming this evening, and we do welcome any additional questions if you guys want to discuss anything further this evening. Not, we look forward to seeing you in the fall.
Does anybody from the committee have anything?
Nope.
Anybody from the public? Well, yes, please. Yes.
Just to introduce myself, I'm Danny Robbins, and I'm with Healthy Acadia, which is implementing the Strength in Me program in Hancock and Washington counties. So I'm going to be here next Wednesday talking about the social side of resilience for communities and helping support some of that. But I just wanted to flag another community that is starting this kind of work, and in a different way, is kind of a resilience and infrastructure workshop with their high school students, where high schoolers are receiving kind of ecology and engineering education and being tasked, this is in Deer Isle, with engineering a solution for their causeway that was flooded by these storms. So as you think of people to bring into this process,
Great.
there's a possibility for like civic imagination.
Anyone else? Thank you, Danny, for joining us. And
Yeah,
next Wednesday at 5:30.
more to come.
And thank you. A lot of you are in a lot of different meetings. There are planning board members here, town council members here, economic development committee members here, folks who work on the waterfront and fixed all this storm damage, our public works liaison, who also led a lot of bodies to help fix the waterfront, our harbor master, business owners, residents, people running for council. So there are a lot of different people here at this meeting. So I thank you all. And thank you, everyone. If you've taken the survey, thank you for that. If you haven't, please do. Your opinion does matter. It does help getting to grants, personal experiences. If you want to write any letters of recommendation, or your experiences, anything and everything helps when applying for grants. So thank you, and for everyone out at home, thank you for tuning in. You can always email me at rich.rotella@bucksportmaine.gov if you have any questions. This will be on our town's website. So thank you.
Yeah. And we do have a sign-in sheet, which I think most of you signed, but to Rich's point about public participation and support for funding, if you don't mind signing that on your way out, we'd appreciate it.
All right. Have a good night. Thank you.